You are listening to When Life Gives You Lemons, the podcast that speaks to high-performing individuals who have been through adversity but come back stronger. I'm your host, Emma Levy, a physiotherapist who has helped elite athletes on their way to Olympic success. This podcast was born following my own trauma when I was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of 36. Sat in the chemo chair, I set myself the goal of starting a podcast to explore resilience and the importance of mindset. Before I introduce today's guest, I just want to take a quick moment to thank you for listening. This is now season 6 of When Life Gives You Lemons, and I couldn't have kept it going without my listeners. If you enjoy listening, do please remember to press the follow button, which you can find on all major listening platforms. Also, a reminder that you're able to watch all of our episodes on YouTube, and you can subscribe there as well, so make sure you don't miss any of our new content. You can also follow us on Instagram at Life Lemons Podcast. Now, on with this week's show. Today, I'm welcoming Anna Mathur to the podcast. Anna is a psychotherapist, best-selling author and podcaster, presenting a twice-weekly dose of the therapy edit. She is also a best-selling author of 5 books now. Her latest book, which was released just a few months ago, titled The Uncomfortable Truth, Change Your Life by Taming 10 of Your Mind's Greatest Fears. You may also have seen Anna on social media, where she has a huge following and shares her personal experiences and challenges of juggling being a mum of 3 whilst also running her own business. On her platforms, you will get an insight into how Anna manages struggles such as anxiety, burnout, people-pleasing, and much more. Anna, thanks for chatting today.
Thank you so much.
I emailed you saying I wanted to talk about imposter syndrome. This has come up a lot on my podcast, and I've heard you talk about it before. However, since sending that email, I've read your book, The Uncomfortable Truths. So there's actually quite a lot more that I want to ask you about, but I hope you don't mind. Can we just start by setting the scene? I introduced you as a psychotherapist. My best friend is a psychologist. Could you explain the difference between psychotherapy and psychology?
I think it probably used to be more pronounced, but now it's just people just find their own ways of working. It's a different training. So psychology is a doctorate, and it's more kind of science based on averages and kind of using different models. And psychotherapy there are various models you can draw from, but it's more like, let's talk about your childhood. It's more kind of analytical. But actually, I've got friends that are psychologists, and if you had a session with either of us, it'd probably be quite similar. But really, it's just, kind of stripping away some of those things that hold us back and keep us feeling kind of unfulfilled and maybe unsupported, and just, that feeling of knowing that there's more for us, but we don't quite know how to get there.
And do you enjoy your work as a psychotherapist?
I love it. I've been doing less kind of clinical work over recent years, although I'm planning on kind of doing more of that next year. And just using that insight, and it's a term that I discovered actually called psychoeducation, because I remember starting in this line of work, taking therapy out of that clinical setting and being like, I don't even know how to explain what I do, because I didn't really know people that worked in the way that I did. And then I heard the term psychoeducation. I'm like, that is what I do. I basically take all that learning and I'm trying to throw it out there in ways that people can grab it and apply it to their own lives.
And is psychotherapy something you always wanted to go into?
I knew that I wanted to be in some kind of caring role. My mum was a physio as well, like you, when I was growing up. So I very much saw how people, it's that healing process, isn't it? It's that directing people towards strength and a more, comfortable life in ways. And I was a real people pleaser, and my identity was very much in helping people. So I sometimes look back quite analytically and think, I just got a job in the thing that made me feel like I deserved to take up space in the world. I kind of legitimized my people pleasing by being a therapist and making it my job to help people. Whereas actually, it's not so much of my identity anymore. It's more of a role. So that's been really interesting as I've addressed people pleasing. It's not as much of a need. I need to help people. It's like I really enjoy helping people, but it's not all I am anymore.
Yeah, it's very different, isn't it? The need to the want.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's talk imposter syndrome. Yeah. I'm quite passionate about this societal notion that we should all stay in one job for our whole working life. With my personal story, with my cancer, we've mentioned I'm a physiotherapist, but after I healed and I recovered, I realised I wanted something a little bit different alongside my physiotherapy. That's when I started the podcast. And what was interesting was I got, and still do get, a little bit of resistance from my loved ones, from my family and friends about that shift. And I think that probably contributes to quite a big imposter syndrome that I get with the podcast and other things that I do outside of my physiotherapy role. But if I'm going to try and continue sharing this message of hope and that we should all try, there's nothing wrong with shifting midlife, I wanted to ask you, how can we reduce these feelings of imposter syndrome that we all get, basically?
I think it's really looking at the shoulds that are kind of thrust upon us externally. Like, you should have one career and you should want to move up in your career until you kind of get to the top, and then, then you've done well. Or you should use everything that all that education you did at uni, that is the path you should go down, otherwise it's wasted. And I just think it's all these shoulds that come at us externally, as you're saying, from family, and then the ones that we often have internally that are telling us, we should be finding this easier, we should be further on by now, things should have. And actually, I think it's just shrugging those off, because when we get to where we feel like we should be, if our identity is so intertwined with that role, with that job, then we're just going to find that we're not going to get that deep sense of, yes, I got here, I am valid, I'm deserving of good things now. We're just going to feel kind of empty. And there's just so much more to us, and we're constantly evolving. And so therefore, to expect ourselves to wear one hat for our whole career, it just feels really restrictive. So it's nice to, start challenging that.
But how do we actually go about challenging the should?
Yeah.
Because if you feel like you should be doing something, you can't say, oh, no, Emma, you shouldn't. Yeah, how does one challenge that?
Just start saying, should I? Should I? Or I should be finding this easier. Should I? Or I should be further on by now. Should I? And what that question does, it just starts drawing it into question, that should. It starts kind of putting cracks through it a little bit. Sometimes I just don't think we question things that much. I remember speaking to someone that had done all their doctor training. Like they were like at the very end, nearly ready to graduate, nearly ready to kind of just be a fully fledged doctor, and that's what they had worked towards and burnt themselves out over. And he says that one day he was just walking down the corridor, just thinking, oh, flipping, I hate this. I wish I wasn't doing this. And then he just felt himself say, do I have to? And he handed in his notice and he quit just before, and it was amazing, because actually sometimes we can walk through in life in step to someone else's dream for us, or in step to an ideal or an idea that we had at another age. Maybe it was a dream that we had and we feel we've got to honour that dream by walking down this path, when actually that path isn't the one we want to walk down anymore. And I just think, we can get, and I've worked with clients who have said, I didn't even want to be a teacher. They've worked for years in an industry and they sit there and say, that's what my dad wanted because he was a teacher. And I just, we can end up resenting people around us if we live to fulfill the dreams that other people have. Or we can, end up resenting ourselves sometimes, or an earlier version of ourselves, because actually we've gone really far down a path that just isn't right and we feel stuck. So I think that question, should I, is just saying, actually, are the walls, to the side of that path, are they as solid as you believe that they are? Or actually, can you mix it up? Can you step off? Can you start to dream about how might you use those gifts and those passions that you've had in a way that is more aligned with where you're at now in life? It's really freeing.
But it also takes a lot of bravery, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And especially when there's often a financial cost to kind of retraining or stepping aside, or it takes a lot of bravery. But we're so much braver than I think we give ourselves credit for. And it's uncertainty and it's change. And as humans, we thrive on predictable. It makes us feel safe when things feel predictable and familiar. Even if we're not happy with them, we can often kind of cling to the predictability and the familiarity because it makes us feel safe, when actually underneath it all we know that we'd probably be happier in a different role or just challenging that status quo for ourselves. So yes, bravery, but we are so much more braver than we give ourselves credit for. I bet there are things that you've been through, and there will be things that you've been through in life that an earlier version of you would have thought, I could never go through that. And here you are.
But I think you get stronger, don't you? Every time you go through something difficult, all these difficult scenarios, you build strength as you go.
So true. But that's why practicing this in small ways, practicing little acts of authenticity. You know, when you're in a meeting or you're even in a social scenario where you just start noticing the things that you are not saying, the opinions that you are not sharing, that are actually aligned with who you are, because you're fearful of what someone might think, or you're fearful of it changing their understanding of you. And actually it's noticing these small opportunities and thinking, what would it be like if I actually voiced that out? You know, so those little moments can be like the coins that you start collecting along the way that start making you feel braver when you say no to things that you actually mean no to, rather than yes, when you're kind of internalizing that no and then doing it resentfully. You know, as we start to honor ourselves in smaller ways, it starts building up courage so that we get to that point of thinking, this just isn't, what I'm doing is not aligned with my heart anymore. I'd love to explore something different. We've built up those little acts of bravery. So those, it just feels maybe I can.
And I think it overlaps with the part of your book where you talk about you are not enough, because that coincides with the imposter syndrome that I'm talking about. And for those of you who haven't read the book yet, there's a chapter where Anna talks about the fact that we should accept that actually sometimes we are not enough. And that I struggled with that concept because, you know, there's my favorite mantra of I am enough. And Anna is telling us that we're not enough.
Well, we're both really, aren't we? You know, we are enough. But actually sometimes the freedom is in realizing that so many things we're aiming for, especially if they're rooted in perfectionism, especially if they're rooted in pleasing others or manipulating or controlling how other people perceive us. You know, we're never going to be enough for the standards that social media set. We're never going to be enough for the standards that the world sets in parts, or the expectations that people have of us. And, you know, for me, that was a really freeing realization that I wasn't failing because I was finding things so hard. You know, I was never going to be strong enough. I was never going to have enough energy for all of the different things that I'd committed myself to because my resources are limited. So in many ways, recognizing that I'm not good enough has actually got me in touch with more of my enoughness. So it's like the both. We need the both.
I found that one really interesting because I think I go around, you know, telling people, oh, you know, believe in yourself, believe you can do it, believe you are enough. And you tell yourself that enough times and then you can transform it to, yeah, I am enough.
Yeah, and we can empower ourselves. But I think it's just, where am I trying to be something that I just do not humanly have capacity for? You know, for me, I went through a period of depression after having my second child, and I very much rebuffed every offer of support because I was like, I've got to be enough. I'm enough. I kind of this furious self-sufficiency, you know, I have to fulfill all these roles. I have to do all these things and do them all well. And actually, you know, I've got to be enough to do this, but I wasn't enough because I was expecting too much from myself. So it was in a circumstance like that where actually just thinking it's not my failure, it's just the limitations of me being human. And I think, so sometimes it is really freeing to recognize where you end and where you need other people, and where that sense of like, I'm good, I'm enough, it's actually can find you pushing on beyond what you've got when you actually just need other people to fill in the gaps.
I understand that. I understand that sometimes we do need that support and we can't always do it alone.
Yeah, you know, I think sometimes we compare ourselves to the ongoing relentlessness of machines. which is really what we're up against as humans these days, isn't it? And they will always outdo us because we wake up a different version of ourselves every day. We wake up with different resources every day, depending on what kind of sleep we had and what quality it had, and things completely out of our control. You know, I might be able to do something today and thrive doing it that yesterday would have felt like walking through treacle. Like, it's just injecting some humanness, I think, into the expectations that we have of ourselves.
Yeah, I would direct. This is an honest opinion. I would direct everyone to your book. I'm just looking at it here; it's on my table. And page 1 in the introduction, you mention your younger sister who was diagnosed with a brain tumor when you were only 8. And she tragically died, didn't she, when you were 10? And this instilled in you a fear of death and health anxiety. And then you tried to be the good girl and you went down this path of people pleasing. And you were trying to avoid these uncomfortable truths that you write in your book. And the ones I found interesting were, some people don't like me. I am going to fail. Ooh, that sat really uncomfortably with me. Life isn't fair. I do agree with that one. I'm not good enough. I've already talked about that. People misunderstood me. I enjoyed that chapter. Bad things will happen. Well, I know, and you know, and we all know bad things do happen. And I am going to die, which is an uncomfortable chapter to read. But, I think something that I've come to terms with in the past few years. So you have now written that you have accepted these truths, and you say that your life is now, your life is more intentional and fulfilling. So it's a big question, but I wanted to ask you, how did you go about accepting all of those 10 uncomfortable truths?
I mean, I think it's moving towards more acceptance. I think we are never going to feel comfortable with any of these things, and I'm always going to battle and war with them. Like I was writing earlier in another context about how I was in a service station and I said, excuse me, to this lady, and I kind of moved past her to get some milk, and I didn't even touch her. And then my husband and kids were down the end of the shopping aisle, and he was like, that woman stuck her finger up at you. I was like, why? And he was like, yeah, she looked really cross when she stuck her finger up at you. And I was absolutely racking my brains. Like, I didn't touch her. Like, maybe she thought I did. He didn't. And I was literally going through every possible scenario. Maybe she follows me on social media and doesn't like what. Maybe, oh, goodness knows. And it was, that real physical response that came up to this sense that I felt quite misunderstood. And like, I wanted to go and find her in the car park and be like, are you all right? What? And I just had to coach myself through that and think, you know what, if someone is literally going to stick their finger up at a stranger, because they walk past, then she's not in a great way, is she? Like, she must feel like a really tightly coiled, spring in order just to do something like that off the back of goodness knows what. And I just had to remind myself again that what other people think of me is out of my control, and often entrenched in their circumstances and their view of the world, and goodness knows. And I just had to let go. So, some people don't like me is something I've grown a really amazing new level of acceptance of, but these things are constantly challenged. Like, I'm never going to feel comfortable with the fact that I'm going to lose people that I love in life. That is always going to feel sad and painful to think about, but at least I'm thinking about it now, and at least I hold a different awareness when I'm with people that mean a lot to me. It drives me to be more intentional about the time that I spend with people, and the fact that I will be misunderstood, it doesn't hold me back from talking or speaking or sharing things, because I know I'm going to be misunderstood, and I just have to accept that. And if I want to live authentically, then I have to move forward with that as a truth rather than something I'm constantly trying to protect myself against. Otherwise, we just filter ourselves to a degree where we don't even really know who we are anymore. So yeah, I'm at different places of acceptance of these truths, but I just don't think we will ever feel entirely comfortable with them, just by the very nature of being human. But I think working on our acceptance of these truths is just so incredibly liberating, and it can free us up as we get to as we nudge, as we challenge them a little bit more each time. That's what I found anyway.
Yeah, regarding being misunderstood, and a previous guest, David Smith, on the podcast, he gave me a really good example, because we're talking about road rage. I'm quite bad with road rage, especially if you're stressed in the morning on the school run, trying to get to work, etc. And then if someone really like beeps at you and swears and is mean and nasty, I really dislike that. But then he said, maybe that person is on their way to chemo. Maybe that person has just lost, their family member, and we don't know what that person is going through. And that did really help it. That helped it with me. So now I kind of take a deep breath if someone's rude and I think, no, they're having a bad day. That's not my problem.
Yeah, it's so helpful when you start to realise that so little of how people respond to you and feel about you is actually anything to do with you at all. And that phrase, like, what people think about you is none of your business. I used to find that really hard. I didn't really understand it. And then I started unpicking it, and it just, it's true that woman that stuck her finger up at me, I don't know what was going on in her life to mean that she was so reactive to a stranger. But I know that no one else in the shop stuck their finger up at me. So therefore, actually that says more about where she's at than me. Because otherwise I would have had a whole shop worth of people sticking their finger up at me. So I think, again, it's just untethering. We just take this offence, and it's almost like we can feel like everything is somehow directly related to us. So it's just kind of cutting that tie a little bit. And it's really helpful. It's really helpful. And displacement in psychology, there's this term is, emotional displacement. And this really is what's going on. Like, those moments where you're tired and frazzled and you grab something out of the cupboard, then, something like in our house, it's normally a box of like cereal or something just falls down and it's everywhere. And you just want to cry. You just want to like smash up the cupboard, pull the door up, cry. And you just think, wow, that's a real overreaction, when really what it is, it's a momentary opportunity to unleash some of the feelings that are probably just pushed down at other points. Because emotions, if we sweep them under the carpet, they don't like just dissolve and disappear. The carpet gets lumpy and we trip over it. So really in that moment, I think sometimes what's happening is like it's a little pressure valve that gets released and all of this other stuff just comes out. And I think that can happen in road rage. We normally know if we feel anger on the road, we were already not feeling great and calm and safe and regulated in ourselves.
On social media, you talk a lot about burnout and parenting. And I know that your previous books were about parenting, weren't they? And it's challenging. It's challenging raising 3 kids. You've got your own business. And on your social media, you often show quite raw emotion, which I imagine allows your followers to be able to empathize with you. But I wanted to ask, have you always been so comfortable in making yourself so vulnerable personally?
No, absolutely not. I remember friends, this was back in probably kind of late, 2010. I remember them staging an intervention with me saying, we know you're not okay, but you never tell us anything. Because I just wanted to be there for other people. And I think that was very much a defense against my own pain and mess and things that were going on in my life that I felt very uncomfortable to share. But so that was kind of how I've been. But I realized that I need people. And I think being a therapist, I have this immense privilege to see behind the scenes of so many people's kind of emotional lives. And you gather this data where you have statistical data to prove that you are not the only one that has intrusive thoughts. You are not the only one that has felt kind of really conflicting emotions at different points around parenting, things like that. So I know that if I can untangle an emotion that I've had and put it out there for people, I know that I am not alone. So I don't feel the same shame that I used to feel. And I don't feel the same shame that other people might feel. So my hope is that as I untangle an emotion, normally give a tip or two or an insight or two that I hope will be helpful, that it will start chipping away at that shame that other people have, so that maybe they can then go and have an honest conversation with someone. So no, I have not always been this vulnerable, but I do so kind of confidently because I just know that I'm not alone. And I know, hopefully it helps people.
So as well as helping other people, has it helped you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, training as a therapist, I had to have therapy. I still have therapy. I'm trying to think how many years later it's been. Kind of 12 years she's been my therapist. Bless her. But it's, I started off just having therapy as a tick box. I thought, well, I just need to do this as a requirement of my training. And I needed it. I really needed it. But I found it so hard to let her do her job. So I'd sit there and I would always be bang on time. It was 7 o'clock in the morning and I'd have gotten a train from Kent into central London, and I wouldn't even drink the water that she put in a glass for me. Like, that's how kind of, I just didn't want to burden her. I felt bad enough that she was there at that point, despite the fact I was paying her and that was her clinical hours. Like, yeah. And I remember her saying to me, Anna, you just don't leave any space for me. You don't give me a job to do, because I would come and I'd say, this has happened in my childhood. This is why I feel the way I feel, and this is what I'm going to do about it. So I would kind of package everything up so neatly that she couldn't get an in. And I think what I found that as I've addressed people pleasing and perfectionism and so many different things, that I'm just so much more undone now. I'm so much more messy emotionally. I'm still quite a tidy person. And actually it's meant that I've had deeper connections with people and just a richer experience of life when I'm not behind my own wall of kind of self-sufficiency and neatness.
So in an ideal world, do you think we should all have therapy?
I think having a level of self-insight and self-compassion, and that, really importantly, self-compassion, that's woven through like all my work really. It's just so important, because when we carry shame, when we carry unaddressed guilt, it impacts behaviour. It impacts the relationships that we allow ourselves to invest in and the support that we allow ourselves to receive. And it impacts the things that we go for and dream for and allow ourselves to hope for. And so self-compassion and therapeutic like self-insight is, I just think, life-changing and necessary to be able to thrive.
So potentially people could start that journey alone through their own self-discovery rather than kind of seeking help from a therapist?
Yeah, well, I think that I love therapy. I'm such an advocate for it, but I know that it comes with kind of, financial implications, and there are waiting lists. And really that's also the reason I've kind of written the books, is the hopes that, if people are on waiting lists, or if that's something that they like to explore, then it gives them an accessible way to start accessing some of the tools. And there are so many podcasts now that are just amazing. I do think podcasts are the gift of the digital generation. I just think we're so lucky to have podcasts like yours that have these powerful conversations and put them out into the world for people to listen to for free. And I've learned so much through the podcasts that I've listened to. So podcasts, books, there are ways that we can have these light bulb moments of insight that change the way that we see ourselves in the world.
And I love podcasts as well. And one of my motivations for starting this podcast was that I always had a fascination into the fact that high performers or experts in their field had often experienced loss or trauma somewhere earlier in their lifetime. You did. You lost your sister when you were very young. And that massive traumatic episode has, of course, dictated your life going forward. And I wanted to ask you, what is your opinion on why does trauma sometimes make us stronger in the long run? How do you explain that from a psychotherapist perspective?
Yeah, I think we can come at it from a few different directions. I think going through really hard things can really awaken you to the fact that you can do those. You can go through hard things. We have a level of resilience that I think sometimes we don't give ourselves credit for. So it's kind of, proof that actually I've made it through. I'm stronger than I expected I would be, and therefore I can do hard things. So I think there's this kind of level of resilience that can be built up. But I think sometimes when we go through trauma, and this is what I would say, and this is actually really interestingly, I'm kind of delving into Gabor Mate's work at the moment, and one of the things that he says in line with this as well is that if we have grown up and been through trauma in any way we have not felt enough, then we can find ourselves striving, striving for approval, striving to do well, because somehow that is maybe gives us the validation and the stronger sense of self that we perhaps have not had or aren't able to give ourselves, because we haven't internalized that from maybe certain caregivers in childhood. So, I think there are a few reasons probably for different people as to why they can, find themselves performing really highly. And I think if it is, for me, I think growing up around loss and real uncertainty and just seeing grief and pain around me, I wanted to be the good girl, and I wanted not to be kind of add any drama or kind of emotional burdening to what was already a painful time. So I think I didn't really have a strong sense of worth and identity in myself, because I just wanted to, my whole focus was on kind of people around me and how they were feeling and not wanting to worsen it. So I internalized a lot. So therefore I see my high performance in different areas of my life, my work, is actually, for many years it's been a striving to prove to myself that I deserve to take up space in the world, and that I deserve the relationships that I have, and I deserve that I'm a good person. And actually I remember the day that my first book came out, it was in the pandemic, and this is what I've been working towards. It was what I dreamed of, and we'd done all this work to kind of get the word out there. And the day that it was out, I really thought I was going to feel like valid. I was going to suddenly have this real strong sense of, right, I've done it now. Look, see, I am good. When actually it was painful. I cried, like not happy tears. I cried because it just showed me another layer of self-worth that I hadn't got, because I just felt like the same old person that had done a bit of work that was out in the world and hopefully would help people. But at the end of the day, I felt like the same old person. And I remember listening to a podcast with Robbie Williams speaking to Fern Cotton. And he said to her, I sold the most amount of albums anyone had ever sold. I think it was the tickets to the tour, that he basically reached like a world record. And he said, and I still wanted to kill myself. And I remember listening to that and thinking, this is the challenge when we place our sense of identity and worth on the goal of achievement, whether it's a medal or a mountaintop experience in life. And we get there and we realize that it doesn't make us better people. Just as failures don't fundamentally make us worse. So I think starting to detach. So for me, my worth being in achievement, I've had to really strip that away and realize that I'm no better or worse, like because of my job and where I go with it or how successful it is. So I think that can be it sometimes, but also it can just be a pursuit of just doing amazing things because you love what you do. But it's not going to be all and end all if you don't get quite where you want to be. Yes, it might be sad and there might be a grief around a hope that couldn't be achieved, but actually you're still okay.
Something that I've learned over the last number of years is the importance of the here and now, and really trying to enjoy the process and not trying to look too far in front. So I used to set these really long-term goals, and now I try and just kind of stay more in the present and not set goals too far in front, because like you said, sometimes you can set those goals and then when you achieve them, you're like, well, what now? Or you don't achieve those goals and then there's a sense of frustration. So I do really personally try and think about the here and the now a lot more now.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, we're always in the process of something, aren't we? And I write about this in the book, the when then game. When I achieve this, then I will feel like I can finally rest. It might be like even simple as when I get this list done for work or in the house, then I can rest. And actually what we end up doing is so often denying ourselves or holding off things that we actually really need or deserve, and say, well, I'm only going to allow myself this thing that I actually really fundamentally need when I've achieved. And it's just, we can end up withholding from joy and presence because we just pin them to a goal. And often we get there, we don't feel as good as we expected to. What we tend to do then is set another goal that it's even harder to achieve. And we strive and we push harder and we think, well, maybe that's it. Maybe I'm not at the top of the mountain after all. Maybe I'm just on a ledge and there's another peak, and we can live our lives like that.
Yeah. Final question, Anna, for you that I ask all of my guests. If you could go back in time to when things were at their worst, what do you wish you could have told yourself back then?
I think, and there have been a few of those times, I think what I would go back and say is that you can do all the things you can to help yourself now. But at the end of the day, you can't speed up time. Time is such an ally. Time is, everyone says time is a healer, and it just is really true in many ways. And there is so much that we can do when we're having a hard time. But at the end of the day, time itself will move us along. You will not always feel like this. Keep moving forward. Yeah. I think sometimes I just want to fix and hurry things along, and we just can't, and it's frustrating, but time is pretty incredible.
Yeah, so patience. We need to be more patient, don't we?
Not my strong point.
Anna, where can people find you if they want to know more?
Yeah, just Instagram is a good one. Everything kind of branches from there. Just Anna Mathur on there.
Brilliant, Anna. Thank you so much for talking to us today. I really enjoyed it. I think we could have kept talking for much longer. I could have asked you much more about those uncomfortable truths that you write about in your book. I direct all of our listeners to read your book because I thoroughly enjoyed it. I love your podcast, The Therapy Edit, so I direct our listeners to listen to that as well. I love what you do. Follow Anna on Instagram, everyone. You get some real raw emotional content on there. And, well, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. I've loved being here. It's been a real honour and privilege to chat to you, Emma. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.